Good day, everyone. I'm Don Smith of FlyPrivate, and welcome. FlyPrivate is a national pay-as-you-fly charter service. And for the past 18 years, we've been helping our business and personal customers charter private jets in what we believe is the most cost-effective manner possible, meaning more trips for your private travel dollars. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Private Jets 101. And what we're going to cover today are the following topics. What is private aviation? How's it organized? Where do you take off and land? Why use jet charter at all? What type of trips can you take? And options for using private jet charter. So let's get started. What is private aviation? Well, private aviation is actually also a synonym for general aviation. And most all of you are aware of what commercial aviation is, but that's where seats are sold on a regularly scheduled route. Airlines, perfect example. Sometimes there's some small planes that do that, but generally that's the airlines. Private or general aviation are aircraft, anything from single engine planes to helicopters, business jets, which we're talking about today, and airliners that are flown on an unscheduled basis. And what that means is you are controlling the schedule of when you arrive and depart. Well, how is it organized and regulated? One of the things that always fascinates me whenever I'm speaking to someone about private aviation is some people are under the kind of misconception that you just call somebody at an airport and they show up with a plane, and do they have to get pilots? Do they have to buy fuel? It's and some of the understanding out there is not quite exactly what happens. So what you will all be pleased to know is that private aviation is extremely well organized and regulated. The Federal Aviation Authority, which you folks know as the FAA, has a section which is called Part 135. And what that refers to is aircraft that are available for public charter. And the way the government looks at it is the consumer knows nothing about aviation and needs to install regulations for their protection. So there are regulations for weather minimums. If there's too much fog, you can't land, you can't take off. The snow, visibility is low. Also, there's regulations for pilot duty times. Pilots can be on duty for up to 14 hours consecutively. And of those 14, they can only fly for 10 hours. And then they need another 10 hours of rest before they can fly again. Pilots are also mandated to have recurrent training on the type of aircraft that they operate, also on new regulations that may have come into place. There are regulations that govern equipment, avionics, and also regularly scheduled maintenance and reporting any unscheduled maintenance. Also, aircraft that are chartered, the registration and ownership of that aircraft is also stored in FAA records, so that when you get on a chartered aircraft, the owner of record is known. Also, there are insurance policies in place for liability, so that when you do charter a private plane, there's quite a bit of background information that's done to make sure that these charters are operated safely for the customer. One of the great perks of using private planes or private aviation is you get a special place to land. Those of you that have only flown commercially may be stunned to find out that there's over 5,000 small airports that private aviation can use in the United States. So what that means practically is that there's an airport within 20 minutes of most homes or offices. versus only 500 for commercial aviation. Now, where you go, the physical location of these private terminals, which are called FBOs. And FBO stands for Fixed Base Operator. Now, where that whole term started was years and years ago when planes were flying long distances, they had to stop someplace for fuel. And these essentially aviation gas stations popped up throughout the United States, and planes would stop, get their fuel, and move on. Well, as private aviation has developed, these FBOs, or fixed base operators, have become much more ornate, as you can see from the photo in front of you. They're a place now with some comfort, although they're designed for short stays. They're designed, in many cases now, have conference facilities. They have hangar and space for aircraft to stay there, live there, be maintained. On the internal section of the FBO, there'll be some pilot weather stations so that the pilots can plan their trips. Also, many have crew restrooms so that if your trip has a bit of a layover, say you landed at 10 in the morning and you're not departing until 3 in the afternoon, pilots have a place to rest, do their business, and stay current. One of the nice parts of this, maybe the nicest, and one of the reasons why many people use private aviation, is that you don't deal with TSA security lines, saving a lot of time. And then a nice question that comes up is, how is security handled? Well, when you book a trip, you provide us with the names and dates of birth of the people who are flying on the trip. And then that information is sent to the TSA prior to departure. So long as a passenger is not flagged on a do not fly list, all of the the TSA work is done before departure. You are required to bring an ID with you, a photo ID, so that the pilots can check and make sure that people on the plane match up with those that are on the manifest. But boarding and deplaning at an FBO is a very easy process. Some of the more rural airports, you actually can drive your car right out onto the tarmac and get onto the plane. So it really makes a significant time savings when you think about it. Just being able to drive right up to the plane and get on, take off, get off the plane, get into a car and go, saves not only minutes, but in many cases, could be an hour of time. So what type of planes are available to charter? Well, there's quite a few. To give you a short answer, we're going to look at them by class. First are the turboprop, and a subpart of that are the piston engine planes and single engine planes. But some of the more popular models are King Air planes, Pilatus, some of the Piper models. You can see they're listed there. Turboprops are used primarily on trips that are about 500 miles or less. They're not especially fast, generally up to about 250 miles per hour. So it takes you a little longer to get places with a turboprop, but they are considerably more cost effective than some of the larger jets for small trips. The next class is very light jets, which really have only been in existence for the last about 15 years. And these are kind of looked at as a bridge between turboprops and light jets. Again, they're used for smaller trips. They're used from 500 miles or less up to about 1,000 miles before they might need fuel. But as you can see, some of the popular models are Phenom and Eclipse and Citation Mustang. VLJs, as they're also called, are good for 4 passengers or less. Not all of them have lavatories. Baggage space is a little limited, but they are jets, so they do take the weather a little better. And most of them all are new, and they're very comfortable aircraft. Light jets are a significant workhorse in the industry. Um, they really were one of the first planes that were developed. There are some models such as the Lear 35 and the Falcon 10, and some of you that know quite a bit about aviation can probably cite perhaps a model that's even more of a legacy than those, but they're the planes that do a lot of the lift in the United States. Popular models, again, are Citation. Lear has some updated models. Raytheon and Beechcraft, and now what's known as Hawker, has very popular models. The Hawker 400 XP is used quite a bit throughout the United States, and the Embraer company, which has a lot of commercial aircraft, has also moved into the private aviation business. Some of the larger aircraft, but now have a model called the Phenom 300. Light jets, for the most part, are used for trips that are about 3 to 4 hours in length or less. I'd like to focus around 3 hours because some perform a little better over 3 hours. They all perform well 3 hours or less, but all of them have lavs. Most of them will fit 5 to 6 people comfortably. Lav space is pretty good. And in the realm of private aviation, they're relatively affordable aircraft. Next category are mid-sized jets. Those are used for trips for about 4 hours in duration. They're a little taller and a little wider, so you can stand up in the cabin. Again, they have full hard door lavatories and a little more baggage space than the light jets. Very popular for trips from New York to Florida, New York down to the Bahamas, and trips where you want a little more room, a little more space. Very popular in the business community. Some will be able to seat up to 8 passengers, and generally they have a very, very comfortable working environment. The next category is super mid-sized jets, and these are very popular for longer range trips. Those that go, say, from coast to coast. Super mid-sized planes will give you 5 to 6 hours worth of range, depending upon the winds. And again, they're slightly bigger cabins than the mid-sized planes, so they're a little more comfortable. They'll have a little more luggage, and they will basically remove the need for a fuel stop, in most cases going coast to coast. And they've become immensely popular in the last 10 years. And the category of aircraft that almost everyone is familiar with are the heavy jets. Those are the planes that you see on television. There's a flight attendant, very comfortable, 6 feet tall cabin, so most everyone can stand flat-footed. They're about 7 feet wide, and most of them are about 30 to 40 feet long, so there's quite a bit of space in there. Plenty of room for luggage. These aircraft go not only across the country, but go internationally. Some of the longer range aircraft will fly to Europe and back nonstop. They may fly to parts of South America nonstop. And then with some fuel stops, some of them will fly to Asia. And again, they are just a beautiful, beautiful aircraft. Comfortably, they're going to seat, depending upon the cabin configuration, anywhere from 10 to 14 people. So now you have to ask yourself, why use private aviation? There's different reasons. Sometimes your company's gotten to the level, or your own means have gotten to a level of, where your time is valuable, and you'd rather spend it in motion than waiting around. Sometimes it's difficult to understand kind of where that breaking point is. Well, over the years, we've studied that. And what we've found is that for every $1 million that an executive or an executive team is compensated, they add $19,000 a day in value. And where this statistic comes from, it's essentially from the insurance industry. a key man life insurance policy. So when a key executive is insured, they'll look at a multiple for a CEO of approximately 6.5 times their earnings. Senior management maybe 5 times, and some of the rank and file management 2.5 times. So what that means is if you have highly compensated executives that are flying commercially, you're paying for the use of private aviation without getting the benefits of it. You're wasting time, you're wasting productivity by having them wait around or conduct a commercial itinerary that might be 3 days that you could do privately in 1 day. So if we look at that, if we had a day of production, which is $19,000 per million, and an average same-day charter is $15,000, the use of private aviation is actually paying for itself. Studies have also shown that companies that use private aviation have a significantly larger return on equity and shareholder returns. Some of the other benefits are security. Now, there's obvious executive security. When you're flying at a remote airport, not many people know what you're doing. You're coming and going. You're not around. You're not exposed to crowds. So if you're have some risk, and some of our clients do have that risk, that's something that is minimized. Also, industrial security is minimized. If you're working on sensitive negotiations or acquisitions, you really don't want to be discussing that in first class or business class where anyone could overhear what you're doing. And with today's day and age and cell phones and recording devices, something that you've worked long and hard on could be, recorded and sent somewhere else pretty easily. As far as mission productivity, you're able to visit more sites and more locations in a day. I mean, we do countless amount of trips where people leave a base location, visit a client, they may visit an office facility, they may visit potential clients, and make 2 or 3 stops in a day and get back home. The aircraft actually becomes a working environment. The National Business Aviation Association has done studies over the years which show that when benchmarked versus your own office environment, which is benchmarked at 100%, the larger an aircraft is, the more you actually get accomplished. There's a multiple. Like a turboprop, you're 1.12% more productive in a turboprop, and it goes up to 1.4% in a heavy jet. You're also able to discuss with your team what's going on. You can strategize before and after meetings in an environment that you control. You have the ultimate in schedule flexibility. You can leave later. This is a key element because we do a lot of trips for folks where they'll depart at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And what that allows you to do from a business standpoint is you might have some work that needs to be done where you need to be on the ground from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or 8:30. You're able to do that without having to be shuffled off trying to get to a commercial flight. You can roll up at 9 o'clock, go to your scheduled itinerary, and then if you're done sooner, you can leave earlier and come home. There's no reason you have to be out there. If you're supposed to leave at 9 and depart at 3 in the afternoon, and you're done at 1:30, there's no reason you can't come home at 1:30. Opens up more time for not only your business, but it opens up time for your family, other priorities that you have that you can satisfy. You're maximizing the day, and it really becomes a tool for you to control the productivity of your life or the productivity of your business. And on our personal trips, leaving later is a big deal because we'll do a lot of trips from 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, get into locations at 2, 3 in the afternoon. You haven't killed an entire day. And when we look at vacation travel, those when you're comparing a commercial itinerary to a private by using private aviation. So what type of trips are there in private aviation? This slide's going to throw a few of you people for a loop, but there are two types of trips. First is a round trip. That seems pretty basic, right? You depart from, say, Colorado, and you go to New York, and then you come back to Colorado. It's pretty simple. If you do that between 1 to 2, maybe 3 days, you could use the same plane, and that would be classified as a round trip. Round trip pricing for aircraft is less expensive than one-way pricing. And it's important to kind of store this information, and it's going to come back later. Not all aviation options provide round-trip pricing. The second type trip you can fly is called a one-way trip. The obvious one-way trip is you're leaving from one location. Let's say you're in Chicago, and you're going to Florida for the winter. So you're going to be gone for several months. Well, we're going to pick you up in the airport closest to your home. Let's say you live north of Chicago. So we'll pick you up in Pewaukee Airport, which is in Wheeling, Illinois. And we're going to drop you off, say, in Palm Beach, Florida. Well, one plane is going to take you there, and 3 months later, another plane is going to come and take you home. And that is more cost effective than using 2 round trips or leaving a plane there for all of those days, weeks, or months. So we have a round trip or a one-way trip. And as it's indicated here on the slide, a round trip, another definition of a one-way is a round trip with several days, weeks, or months between arrival and departure. It's important to have a basic understanding of this because many aviation options only have one-way pricing. So we'll get to that down the road, but those are the two types of trips. All right, so you've decided that private aviation might be for you, or you're using it already and you're trying to learn a little bit more about it. How can you use it? Well, there's several options you can buy and use private aviation, each of which has its pros and cons based on the following criteria. Is it a round trip or is it a one-way? What's your base of location and what's your destination? What type of plane do you need? How much money are you comfortable really spending on all of this? Cons of each. First, you could use local charter. And many of you may do that now. You may be familiar with it. The pros of that is you charter from a local Part 135 operator that's based in your area. You do it when you need to. It's an excellent option for round trips, shorter round trips, meaning you're going to leave today, come back tomorrow, or come back a day or two later. The further away the trip is, the longer a plane can stay with you and then come home at round trip prices. The cons of using local charter is there may be limited availability. They may only have a couple of planes, and if they're booked that day, there's no planes. And there might be a limited amount of aircraft options. You may need a plane that goes 4 or 5 hours, and they may have a plane that only goes an hour or two. So it may just be out of position as far as the aircraft that you need. The next option we're going to look at, people tend to use when they start to do some flying of, let's say, a half a dozen or more trips a year. They have some one-ways, which aren't always good for the local operator. They have some round trips, which may not be in their home base, but they want availability. So they look into some guaranteed availability options. And these are called programs. So the kind of catch-all term for a program is called jet membership. Jet memberships, it's an actual contractual commitment to purchase a specific number of flight hours or a dollar volume of charter in exchange for access to a local fleet or nationally chartered aircraft. Pros of this is a set pricing structure. So every category, whether it's a turboprop, a light, a mid, heavy, super mid, all have hourly pricing structures. They also have guaranteed availability, and there's a lot of aircraft options which the company or the customer can choose from. The cons are that you're going to be billed at one-way pricing. So you may have a round trip, and you may not be billed at round trip rates, and that can be a substantial difference. It could be as much as 15 to 30% difference between round trip and one-way pricing. So it's important that you know what type of trips you have. The other potential negative of jet membership is you're billed at actual flight time after the trip. So you have your hourly pricing structure. Let's say for a mid-sized plane, it's $7,000 to $8,000 per hour, and you believe you're going to go fly 3 hours in one direction and come back 3 hours in another direction. And so 6 hours. So you say, hey, this trip's going to be $42,000. Well, if there's some weather, or there's some longer taxi time, or your aircraft is rerouted because you're flying into a busy airport like New York on a Friday, or Chicago in some bad weather, or Florida on a busy weekend, that 6 hour trip may turn into close to a 7 hour trip. And what you thought was one number will be a significantly higher number after the fact. But the catch to that is you don't know what that actual cost is until you receive your either monthly or quarterly statement. And let's face it, we all move fast and we're all on to the next thing. So when you think something's going to cost X amount of dollars and it costs X plus 15% more, you're probably going to forget about it by the time you get the statement. So when you budget X amount of hours or dollars, it's going to flush by faster than you think when you're in any of these programs that are billed at actual flight time. Very important thing to remember and keep track of. Another option that is used for multi-trip flyers is fractional ownership. And fractional ownership, many of you may have heard of, you may be involved with it. It's a popular option. It's a timeshare for jets. And the shares of aircraft are sold in 50-hour increments, and they are split into 16ths because there are 800 hours available for sale. One of the pros of having fractional ownership is if you desire to have the same type of aircraft all the time. There are many people that have specific airports that they fly in and out of, that an aircraft is designed and has the right specifications to safely go in and out of a shorter field, or altitude, for instance. And the customer may want to have the same type of aircraft all the time. Fractional ownership will guarantee that you are owner of a tail number, one specific tail number, but you sign other agreements that allow you to interchange amongst the fleet of that fractional operator, which allows you to fly on several different tails. However, they are the same plane and plane model. The cons, again, you're priced at one-way pricing all the time. You're billed actual flight time after the trip, and there's some costs involved with fractional ownership. First, you make a deposit or an acquisition dollar amount, and based on the size and the number of hours that you're purchasing, can be anywhere from several $100,000 to $1 million, $2 million, or $3 million. That's to essentially make your deposit on the acquisition of the aircraft. Then you pay a monthly management fee, which again is assigned and is proportionate to the size of aircraft you own and how many hours you own. They can range from a couple $1,000s a month up to $20,000 a month, but you're paying that every month, whether you're flying the plane or not. You're also paying an occupied hourly cost every time you get in the plane, which means that cost is, again, could be a couple $1,000s an hour up to $7,000 or $8,000 an hour. And that pays for the pilots, the fuel, and the variable expenses for that trip. When I go back to the monthly management fee for a second, that pays for the fixed costs of the fractional operation. Hangars, insurance, training, advertising and marketing. Some of these programs have to do a significant amount of advertising and marketing to attract new customers, and that's coming from you and your share purchase. So those are the financial components of fractional ownership. Now, one of the derivatives of fractional ownership, which essentially I like to call, to make it easy to understand, it's called block fractional. This is essentially a bite-sized version of fractional. So as I just discussed, fractional ownership is sold in shares of 50 hours or more, 50 hours up to, I guess you can buy 100% of a plane and pay the proportional acquisition, monthly management fees, and occupied hourly charges. But let's say either A, you don't know, or B, you want to fly in a specific fleet of planes. Well, many of the national operators, fractional operators, sell what are called block fractional programs. Now, this is a prepaid lease of a fractional share, and this is sold in a 25-hour increment, so it's less than the contractual 50-hour requirement, and you pay an all-inclusive charge. So essentially, the monthly management fee, acquisition or lease cost, occupied hourly charge, they're all rolled into, in taxes, are all rolled into one amount. If there's any additional fuel surcharge that might be needed, it's all rolled into one hourly amount, and you buy that in 25-hour increments. And the block fractional pricing structure comes with a premium for allowing you to have the access to a specific fleet of aircraft for only 25 hours at a time. It really works as an intro level to people for fractional ownership. It can also serve as a backup if someone owns a specific type of plane and there's a block fractional membership available in that corresponding type of plane. Someone may buy a couple of 25-hour block fractional agreements to use as a backup. Again, it's one-way pricing all the time at a higher amount than fractional, and it's billed at actual flight time after the trip. So have to watch your costs when it comes to block fractional. They spend a lot of money on advertising and marketing. So if you're new to private aviation, you're likely to come across block fractional very easily because they're very easy to find. Whole ownership. Who wouldn't want to have their own plane? You control the schedule, you control the crew, you own the type of jet, so you can go when you want to go, anywhere you want to go, at any time. That's the pro. The con is it's an intensive capital investment. You're responsible for, we just went over the financial information about, in a general term, about fractional ownership. Well, multiply it out proportionately by whole ownership. You're responsible for the crew, hiring, firing, training, maintenance of the plane, scheduled or unscheduled, hangar, insurance. It's a big commitment if you're not in the aviation business. If you're an organization that's large enough, we have clients here that own several aircraft and still use our service. but it's a significant division and investment for folks. And as a benchmark, unless there's an overwhelming availability or desire to use depreciation to shelter this entire ownership enterprise, the suggested hourly utilization would be 400 hours or more annually. At that point, owning an aircraft can begin to make some financial sense. Now, the last option, where we have our commercial, is FlyPrivate. 18 years ago, we developed a very simple pay-as-you-fly method. We have upfront fixed pricing, so nothing is billed after the fact. We take all of the flight time that's estimated and calculate it, put it all together, put the taxes together, include some catering, and give you one lump sum. And you book the trip, and it doesn't change unless you change the itinerary. We offer round trip and one-way pricing. So if you have a trip that's classified as one-ways, we're going to give you the best options in one-way pricing. If it's a round trip, we're going to give you the best aircraft options using round trip pricing, which we've mentioned can be significantly less money than one-way pricing. It's unlimited aircraft selection. Earlier in the presentation, we went over turboprops all the way up to heavy jets and ultra long-range jets. Depending upon the flight or the mission you have, you can choose from multiple aircraft. So you could be a mid-sized trip on one plane or on one trip, and you might use a light jet or a turboprop on another. You really can allocate your aviation dollars very efficiently. We have national and international aircraft ability. We're available to our clients 24/7. As we've mentioned a couple of times, we've been at this for 18 years, so we've done thousands of flights. And financially, there's no acquisition costs, no monthly management fees, there's no deposits, and there's no contractual commitments. So whether you have one trip or 70 trips a year, you're welcome here at FlyPrivate. So now we're going to take any questions that you might have on this presentation. We covered a lot of information and a lot of broad topics fairly quickly, but we're going to take a minute to take a look through and see if there are any questions that we'd like to address now. Let's see. First question comes from Cynthia. How long is needed to book a trip? That's a great question. The short answer is, as soon as you know about a potential trip, please contact us. Whether it's next week, next month, 3 months from now, the more lead time, better pricing that we'll be able to provide you. However, we get people off the ground in as little as 2 or 3 hours, depending upon where they are. So what we like to encourage is fluid communication. If we can do some logistical planning, that allows us to give you better options and give you better pricing, and make your overall experience much better. Let's see. Angela asks, how are customs handled at smaller airports? That's a very, very, very insightful question, Angela, because not all small airports have customs, but many do. And how they're handled is, as I mentioned briefly earlier, all of the customers' information is submitted to our organization and other options before the trip. Same is true with passport information. So that passport information is given to us. We give that to the operator, who in turn gives that to the customs officials, who pre-screens it, and then you are able to board aircraft, provided the airport has customs. You're able to board the aircraft and land at small airports when customs officials are present. So you don't have to get off the plane. Let's say you landed in, we'll use Boston for example. Let's say you landed in Boston. You don't have to deplane and then go to customs that everyone else has gone through. The customs officers come to the FBOs. They may board the plane, ask a couple of questions, check your information, and then move off. But it's a very, very swift process, significantly easier than it is in large commercial terminals. Jonathan asks, can you bring pets on board? And the answer is yes. And in fact, many people use private aviation because they can bring their pets on board. There are a couple of small rules, like to be accessible, some carrying cases for small animals, or some leashes if needed. But a lot of you be very surprised how many animals are, how many dogs, small lap dogs and even some larger dogs, have been on private planes that are very comfortable. But it's a large reason why a lot of people use private aircraft, is they can bring the pets on board with them. Marjorie asks, can you explain the round trip one-way situation, please? Yes. Very simply, let's look at Chicago to Florida. We looked at this a little bit earlier, but let's just estimate in round numbers that it's 3 hours in each direction. So the total flight time is 6 hours. So in charter aviation, to tie up a plane at round trip prices, you need 2 hours per day of flying. So you take the 6 hours of total flying, divide it by the number 2, and you get 3. That's the number of days you can tie up a plane at round trip pricing. So if you're leaving on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, coming back on Sunday, we would use one plane, and it would be more cost effective to have that one plane put up in hotels. Cost of the trip would include overnights for the pilots and any of their daily incidental charges. Then it would be to use 2 separate planes. Now, if you're going from Chicago to Florida and you're going to be there for a week or 3 weeks or 3 months, it would be far more cost effective to use 2 different planes at one-way pricing. So you just have to calculate that aviation envelope, which is total flying divided by the number 2, gets you the amount of days you can use a plane at round trip pricing. That is the hardest mathematical equation anyone should ever have to go through to use private aviation. It's pretty simple, but once you understand that, it unlocks quite a few options for you in private aviation, and I'm glad you answered that question. We have time for one more question, and Taylor writes, how do we know the right size or type of aircraft for each trip? Simple. By communicating with us, the type of trip, which we'll understand the itinerary as soon as you send it to us. If you're new to this, or just a novice in general, or trying to make sure you make the right decision, we will walk you through the options and give you several different options and give you the pros and cons of each type of aircraft. Some of our blog, our website has specs, but most importantly, we have a lot of experience and can tell you if it makes sense to book a certain category of jet rather than another category of jet. And the mission here has always been to help our clients use private aviation in the most cost-effective manner possible. So to answer the question, we'll help you do it. Well, we're out of time. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your attention. If you have some trips you'd like to discuss or flying that you'd like to discuss, you can contact us at our telephone number that you see, at the email that you see, and we'll be very happy to be of help. We look forward to being of service, and we hope we've been of service and made you a more informed or better consumer of private aviation. Thank you.